Hi everyone, welcome to Go Local Live. I'm Go Local News editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for joining us this Wednesday afternoon. We'd like to welcome back a familiar face. Joseph Molina Flynn, president of the Rhode Island Latino PAC, immigration attorney in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. Thank you for joining us in studio today.
Thank you, Kate, for the invitation as always.
Well, I appreciate your taking the time to come in because on the national level, the DHS report recently released raised so many issues, and I wanted to have you in to talk a little bit about what was revealed that's happening, on our country's borders, your reaction, and of course, thoughts about what needs to be done.
Yeah, so let's start in the beginning, right? Where did this report come from? It came from the Office of the Inspector General for the Department of Homeland Security. These are people who work for the administration, or though they are an independent body, but they don't have any political alliance, right? So this is not the Democrats saying that the situation is horrible, but the situation at the border really has reached the level of a humanitarian crisis. The DHS report revealed that people are being housed in cages, some of them in standing room only cells for periods of extended time without access to basic human needs like toilets, water, toothbrushes, food, and really disconcerting is the fact that there are people who are willing to come in and help these individuals and provide water, and instead of allowing them in, they've been arresting them. And so, to all the people who feel like what's going on at the border is okay, I would ask them to take a look at the news releases regarding that DHS report and what it really says, because we cannot continue to treat people this way.
And as we were discussing earlier, the timing of this, sort of what happened since, obviously got a lot of play nationally as to what was revealed. But then other things came up in the news, and my question, of course, to you was, do we think anything will happen of this report? And you point to the fact of now, several days to a week later, we've seen not much.
Exactly. It's really concerning that over the past week there hasn't really been much movement. Instead, what we've seen is a plethora of attacks on people like Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez and Joaquin Castro, who have revealed that the situation really is as bad as the DHS report says it is. They took some undercover photos. Sure, they weren't supposed to take them, and video, but it really does open people's eyes to what's really going on there. And that's where the rhetoric has shifted. So in a week, we haven't done anything other than attack the people who brought light to this issue. And it is a real crisis. And so I would urge all of our politicians to do what they can to make sure that this crisis is resolved as quickly and efficiently as possible.
And, as you mentioned, not having seen any action to date, urging, as you said, those politicians to take action, do you have any expectation that, the public, if there are concerns, and as you said, there are concerns, continue to put pressure on, they can affect change?
Well, I would hope so. I mean, at least with regard to the way that people are being housed and detained. I would hope that this is a real eye-opener for people who maybe haven't been the most sympathetic to the immigration process in the past, and that they will now apply pressure on their elected officials to do what they need to do. And so what I mean by that is people that have been on the other side of the conversation, because if you voted for some Republicans who may be opposed to making swift immigration change, if you apply the pressure to at least resolve this issue, maybe the Congress can come together and take swift action. But I'm cautiously optimistic about the fact that they may be able to do something. A lot of these other things that we've talked about in the past have been going this route for years, and we've failed to do anything to correct them. And it's only going to keep getting worse. The situation in Central America is not one where people are going to stop coming to the U.S. because of what's going on at the border. They're really desperate to get out, and so they will continue to expose themselves to this situation. And it's only going to increase to get worse unless our elected officials take action to correct it.
And something else you had pointed out in recent weeks, Joseph, I want to talk about as well, took to social media to warn folks against getting Puerto Rican papers. Now, this is nothing new, but how technology is caught up a little bit, it could put folks in a very compromising position.
Yeah, so I did that because as an immigration attorney, I see a lot of cases that come in wanting to adjust status or to get their legal right to remain in the United States. And part of my screening process is I ask people if they've ever worked or had an ID with another identity. And when it comes up that they have, I then proceed to ask, was that identity something that belonged to an American citizen? And inevitably, for the Latino community specifically, a lot of them have used papers that belong to a Puerto Rican to either work or obtain a driver's license or whatever the case might be, because there's no other legal way to obtain one. Unfortunately, in terms of the immigration process, that puts a red flag on you forever. And you are forever barred from most forms of relief, from either being able to affirmatively get status in the United States or from being deported. And so this is more of a cautionary warning to people that they should not be doing this. Before they engage in any of this type of conduct, they should consult with an attorney, and most immigration attorneys, if not all, would tell them to not do that because the price that they pay is too high.
And as you mentioned, folks are just desperate. Like
Absolutely.
if they see a certain price point that say, you know what, this could be what they think is a short term or short to long term solution, if you will. But you said the price is too high to pay. That if the truth comes out, obviously the situation they can find themselves in.
Yeah, and being forever barred is something that you're never going to be able to overcome. The DMV system now has facial recognition software we were talking about a little bit earlier, which will match up the two identities and recognize that it's the same person trying to utilize two different identities. And I think for those listeners who are not familiar with, or viewers who are not familiar with the immigration process, it's important to note that a lot of times this is done with the consent of the Puerto Rican person. They may not be working for whatever reason and may feel like this immigrant who is putting their papers to work can accumulate the Social Security hours necessary for them to be able to collect a retirement at a later age. So it's a very convoluted area of immigration law. It's not people who are legitimately stealing other people's identities in order to be able to do this. A lot of times it's with the consent and acquiescence of the citizen.
How common would you say this is?
It's pretty common. Puerto Rico actually had to change their birth certificate format and the paper that it's printed on a couple of years ago in order to force everybody to go and get a new birth certificate so that this would stop happening. And I continue to see it day after day. Last week, the day that I posted on social media this warning, I'd had two people that came in that morning that this was the issue they had. So it's fairly common.
And when you're faced with it, as you had just alluded to, as an immigration attorney, I mean, if people come in to you and say, this is the situation that I'm in, is there any out?
There is no out, and for the most part. And so we have no way of being able to normalize their status. They have to continue to live in the shadows. This is something that nobody wants. I understand why the policy is what it is. It's in order to prevent people from stealing the identities of U.S. citizens. But I think it should be a little bit more forgiving when it is done with the permission and acquiescence of the U.S. citizen.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit, we had chatted before, again, the recent damning Johns Hopkins report, which we discussed. And most people know wasn't anything new of knowing, obviously, what's going on with the state of education here in the Providence schools. And as Go Local has reported, similar school systems across the state as well. But you raised a particular point of the English language learners and the support given by the state, and that level, you saying, is just nowhere near where it needs to be.
No, it's absolutely not where it needs to be. As people know or may not know, the way that students are funded is through the funding formula. and that funding formula does not contain provisions for ELL. And so the only way to get ELL funding is through the budgetary process. In the past, there had been $2.5 million that were included in the budget for ELL. This year, the governor increased that number to $5 million. But $5 million is simply not enough out of a $10 billion budget. I understand that there are constraints on the governor to make incremental strides, but they're just simply not enough. And a lot of this has to do with the way that the budget is then negotiated in the House. Because the first thing they always want to cut, unfortunately, is ELL funding. I'm also on the board of the Latino Policy Institute. I don't know if we've had an opportunity to discuss that previously. And the Latino Policy Institute released a report about how bad the state of Latino education was in 2014. We're here 5 years later and still discussing the same issue. And the educational system in Rhode Island has been on the decline for a really long time. This isn't something new, it's just now getting the attention that it needs. And hopefully that'll motivate our elected officials here locally to do what they need to do in order to improve our educational system. It's sad that our neighbors in Massachusetts, just by moving to another state, you could give your children the education that they need, while if they remain to live in Rhode Island, they will not get the education that they deserve. And it's really sad to think about that and how zip codes really do make a difference in the educational attainment of our children.
And how big of an impact do you think that ELL supports have? There's such a focus, obviously, on results and test scores, but when we have students who have language barriers, might be coming, again, mid-K through 12 to the country, do you think the state recognizes that fact, that supporting students for whom language is probably the number one barrier to learning, that they could then, the return on investment would be exponential if that was addressed at the root level?
Absolutely. So let's tie this all up in a knot, right? This whole conversation that we've been having. Imagine you're a child from Central America, from a country where there's no formalized education system. You come to the border with the US. You're held in a cage for months, days, weeks, whatever it is. You're traumatized by that whole experience, and in some cases being separated from your parents. You then come to Rhode Island, where you're expected to take these tests, and you're not being given the education that you need to get to these tests. And so it's a sure fail system. It's never going to work unless we take the steps that are necessary in order to correct it. I'm really hopeful that the new commissioner of RIDE, Angelica Infante Green, will be able to make some strides in that department, and that the governor will continue to work with the House, mostly, throughout the remainder of her term in order to increase this very important level of funding.
Well, I appreciate your taking the time to come into the studio to talk about both national and local issues of importance here. So Joseph Molina Flynn, again, immigration attorney, president of the Rhode Island Latino PAC. Thank you for your time coming into the studio.
Thank you so much, Kate.
And thank you for watching this Wednesday afternoon. If you've missed Smart Health at 4 o'clock, we were focusing on strokes and, of course, talking about the latest here with Joseph. We'll see you back in studio tomorrow here on Go Local Live. Of course, in the meantime, check out golocalprov.com and find us on Facebook throughout the evening and the morning. We'll see you tomorrow on Go Local News Editor Kate Nagel.